Welcome to Last History of America, the only place where we peel back the faded layers of time to reveal the darkness that history books tried to forget. Today, we are not discussing a war, a president, or a famous battle. Today, we are discussing a mystery that was buried so deep that even the locals who lived through it refused to speak its name for over 50 years. It is a story from the coal-black hollows of Appalachia, a tale that sits at the intersection of medical anomaly and terrifying folklore. This is the story of the Blackwood Sanatorium, the women who lost their souls, and the child that was never supposed to be born. They called them the Hollow Women, and they called him the Cursed Baby. To understand why this happened, we have to travel back to the winter of 1923, to a time when medicine was primitive, superstition was law, and the mountains kept secrets better than any vault. The year was 1923, and the location was a remote, jagged cut in the West Virginia mountains known as Blackwood Hollow. In this isolated valley stood a sprawling, decaying mansion that had been converted into a private sanatorium for women suffering from hysteria and melancholia. In the early 20th century, these were catch-all diagnoses for women who were too difficult, too loud, or too sad for society to handle. They were shipped off to Blackwood under the care of Dr. Elias Thorne, a physician who had fled the medical boards of Chicago under a cloud of suspicion. Thorne was a man obsessed with the idea that human consciousness was a fluid, a tangible energy that could be manipulated, drained, and transferred. He believed that sadness was not an emotion, but a physical weight that could be surgically removed, or at least that was the lie he told the families who signed away their daughters. But as the winter of 1923 dragged on, the treatments at Blackwood took a turn from the unethical to the supernatural. It started with the silence. At first, the staff thought it was a side effect of the new sedation regimen. The women in Ward B stopped screaming. They stopped crying. They stopped talking to one another. But they didn't sleep. They sat upright in their beds, eyes open, unblinking, staring at a point on the wall that seemed to shift depending on who was looking at it. They ate without tasting, walked without stumbling, and followed commands without hesitation. They were empty. The nurses began to whisper in the break room that these women weren't just calm. They were gone. It was as if whatever essence made them human had been scooped out, leaving behind a warm, breathing shell. They became known as the Hollow Women, a title that wasn't given by the doctors, but by the orderlies who felt a chill walk over their graves whenever they had to walk through Ward B. The Hollow Women did not react to pain. They did not react to cold. They existed in a state of perpetual, terrifying vacancy. Dr. Thorne, rather than being alarmed, seemed fascinated. He began to keep rigorous notes, which we have only recently uncovered through sealed court records. In his diary, he wrote that the women had reached a state of pure vesselhood. He believed he had successfully severed their connection to their own egos. But he needed a recipient for this excess energy he thought he had harvested. He believed that the consciousness he had drained from the 20 women in Ward B had to go somewhere. It needed a battery, a conduit. And in the spring of 1924, that conduit arrived in the form of a pregnant patient named Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was not like the others. She had not been sent for hysteria. She had been sent for shame. Unwed and 17, she was a disgrace to her wealthy family in Charleston. She was 8 months pregnant when she arrived at Blackwood, terrified and confused. Dr. Thorne immediately segregated her from the general population, placing her in a room directly adjacent to the Ward B, the chamber of the Hollow Women. He instructed his staff to feed her a diet rich in iron and strange, tinctured sedatives that he mixed himself in his private laboratory. He spent hours sitting with her, reading to her, and strangely, reading to her unborn child. He became obsessed with the idea that the child would be born as a tabula rasa, a blank slate, but he didn't want it to stay blank. He wanted to fill it. He wanted to pour the collective consciousness, the sorrow, the memories, and the voices of the 20 hollow women into the mind of the unborn infant. The tragedy that followed is still the subject of debate among parapsychologists and historians alike. As Eleanor's due date approached, the atmosphere in the sanatorium became suffocating. The lights flickered constantly, despite the generators running at full capacity. The temperature in the basement morgue dropped below freezing, even though it was the height of summer. And the hollow women, they began to change. They stopped sitting still. They began to press their faces against the reinforced glass of their ward, all 20 of them, standing in a perfect line, looking directly at Eleanor's door. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched. The staff was too terrified to clean the rooms. The orderlies quit one by one, citing bad feelings and whispers in the walls. On the night of July 14th, 1924, a storm of biblical proportions slammed into Blackwood Hollow. Thunder shook the foundations of the old mansion, and rain lashed against the windows like handfuls of gravel. Eleanor went into labor at midnight. Dr. Thorne, locked inside with his head nurse, performed the delivery without outside help. What happened in that room was pieced together later from the nurse's frantic testimony to the police. She described the labor as violent, unnatural. She said that when the baby crowned, the air in the room felt like it had been sucked out, creating a vacuum that popped their ears. And when the baby was born, it did not cry. Not a sound. The nurse claimed that the moment the cord was cut, the storm outside stopped instantly. The silence was deafening. Dr. Thorne held the baby up, a boy, and according to the nurse, he was smiling. But it wasn't a baby's smile. It was a wide, knowing smile. Then the screaming started. It wasn't coming from the baby. It was coming from Ward B. All 20 hollow women, who had not made a sound in 6 months, screamed in unison. It was a sound of such raw, unfiltered agony that the nurse covered her ears and fell to her knees. The police report from the next day noted that officers found the women still screaming, their throats bleeding, their eyes wide with a terror that no human should ever have to witness. They were no longer hollow. They were full of something, and it was tearing them apart. Dr. Thorne named the child Silas. He refused to let Eleanor hold him. In fact, he ordered Eleanor to be moved to the attic immediately, claiming she was suffering from postpartum psychosis. But Eleanor wasn't psychotic. She was terrified. She told the attic guards that her baby was dead, that the thing Thorne was holding was a demon wearing her son's skin. She claimed she could hear the women's voices inside her head, and they were cold. Silas was placed in a nursery in the center of the hospital, guarded day and night by Thorne himself. The baby never cried. He never slept. He simply watched, his dark eyes following movement with the precision of an adult. The curse of Blackwood began to manifest almost immediately. The livestock on the grounds died overnight, their bodies found with no marks on them, just completely drained of blood. The well water turned black and smelled of sulfur. The remaining staff members began to suffer from nightmares so vivid that they couldn't distinguish sleep from waking. They dreamt of the hollow women clawing at the inside of their own skulls, trying to get out. They dreamt of the baby, Silas, standing over their beds, speaking in the voices of the 20 women. One by one, the staff fled. By the end of the month, only Dr. Thorne, the head nurse, and the terrified guards remained. The final chapter of this nightmare began on October 31st, 1924. Halloween. A fire broke out in the basement of the sanatorium. It spread with unnatural speed, consuming the dry timber of the old mansion within minutes. The fire trapped everyone inside. The fire department from the nearest town took 3 hours to arrive due to the washed-out roads, and by the time they got there, Blackwood was a smoldering ruin. They found the bodies of the hollow women in a circle in the yard. They had not burned to death. They had broken the glass of their ward and run outside, where they had formed a ring around the burning building and died of smoke inhalation, holding hands. Dr. Thorne's body was found in his office, seated at his desk. He had not burned. He had died of a heart attack, pen still in hand, writing in his diary. The final entry read, "The vessel has shattered. They are free. God help us all." Eleanor Vance was found in the attic. She had survived the fire but died of hypothermia on the roof, staring at the moon. But the most disturbing discovery was made in the rubble of the nursery. The police found the metal crib. It was twisted and melted by the heat, but inside there was no body. There were no bones. There was nothing but a scorch mark in the shape of a small child, leading out the window. Silas, the cursed baby, was gone. For decades, the locals sealed off the road to Blackwood Hollow. They planted trees to hide the scar on the landscape. The story became a campfire tale, a warning to children to behave and to never go up the mountain. But history has a way of bleeding through the cracks. In the 1970s, a new wave of investigators began to look into the Blackwood incident. They found the surviving relatives of the Hollow women. And here's where the story takes a turn that makes your blood run cold. The relatives reported that after the fire, the nightmares didn't stop. In fact, they started hearing voices. The voices of their mothers, their sisters, and their aunts who had died in that asylum. They said the voices weren't coming from ghosts. They were coming from a single source. There were sightings. A tall, dark-haired man was seen in the area on the anniversary of the fire every decade. In 1934, a hitchhiker was picked up near the old Blackwood site. He never spoke a word. He just smiled. The driver dropped him off miles down the road and later realized the man never left footprints in the dust. In 1954, a break-in occurred at the county records office. The only files stolen were the medical records of the Hollow women and the birth certificate of Silas Vance. In 1984, a nurse who had survived the fire, now an old woman living in a nursing home in Ohio, was found dead in her room. She had written one word on the wall in her own lipstick: "He grew." The theory that historians and paranormal investigators have settled on is this: the Hollow women were not just victims of a cruel doctor. They were part of a ritual. Dr. Thorne didn't just want to cure them. He wanted to achieve immortality. He believed that if he could concentrate the life force of 20 human beings into one indestructible vessel, he could live forever. But the ritual backfired. The collective consciousness of the women overwhelmed the infant mind of Silas. The baby didn't just contain their souls. The baby became them. They were no longer individuals. They were a hive mind trapped in a growing body. The cursed baby was not a demon. He was a cacophony of 20 trapped women, screaming in unison, controlling a single biological form. We are coming to the end of this record, but I must leave you with one final piece of evidence that suggests this story is not over. Just last year, the sealed diary of Dr. Thorne resurfaced at an auction in New York. It was purchased by an anonymous buyer. Inside the back cover, hidden in a pocket, was a photograph. It was taken in 1960. It shows a man standing in front of the Blackwood ruins. He looks to be in his 30s, but if you zoom in on his eyes, you don't see one personality. You see a kaleidoscope of expressions, 20 expressions, all fighting for control of the face. And written on the back of the photo in Dr. Thorne's distinctive handwriting are the words, "The experiment continues." We are waiting for you. So, the next time you feel a sudden chill in a warm room, or you hear a whisper when you are alone, remember the Hollow women. Remember that they are not wandering spirits lost in the wind. They are together. They are whole. And they are looking for a new home. The baby is no longer a baby. He is walking among us, carrying 20 souls in a dark vessel, searching for the one thing Dr. Thorne couldn't give them: release. This is the last history of America, reminding you that the past is never dead. It's just waiting to be born again.